For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. It's amendment number 146.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 146, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Forbes of Virginia.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 17, 2011, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, since 2006, the taxpayers have entrusted the Department of Defense with over $2.5 trillion. And the law has required that the Department of Defense make sure that they allow the taxpayers to know where that money is being spent by providing audited financial statements. Yet in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee, it was established recently that no such audited financial statements were filed in 2007, 2008, 2009, or through 2010, and that none would be filed this year. Mr. Chairman, the Secretary of Defense testified that compliance with the law was in fact a priority and that they had had a plan at the Department of Defense. But when you put up the website just 2 days ago from the Department of Defense, it showed very clearly that the plan that they had had in 2007, 2008, 2009 said that they would have completely filed, clean, audited statements by 2010. They were only 100% off because, according to the testimony, right now the records at the Department of Defense are so bad that less than 5% of all of the monies given to the Department of Defense are in an audit-ready position. So, Mr. Chairman, we've heard some draconian efforts to try to get them into compliance. This is no such effort. What this simply does is to recognize that we give $2 million in the funds set forth in this amendment that are basically party funds. They're funds for dinners, they're funds for entertainment, they're funds that have no impact directly on our warfighter. And what this amendment simply does is to take away those funds, Mr. Chairman, and our thought is that if we take away those funds until we have compliance with those audited financial statements that the taxpayers deserve, we'll give a strong incentive to make sure that we get that compliance and we're not 100% off. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Does the gentleman from Washington seek to claim the time
yes,
in opposition?
I asked for the time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized.
And I rise in opposition to the amendment. This amendment would prohibit the Department of Defense from spending any funds, for official representation due to a lack of auditable financial statements. Now, I completely agree with the gentleman on the point that we need to get them to do this. I just think this approach is not the way to do it. If we want to the authorizers could set a time frame in statute, and that's the way to do it without cutting out these funds when they're entertaining people from other countries and around the world. I just think it's one of those things that sounds good, but is going to have unintended consequences. Audible financial statements have long been a goal of the Department of Defense. The committee has long pressed DoD to improve the quality of its financial management and will continue that effort in the coming year. Can we keep it down over there a little bit? However, eliminating official representation funds is not connected to that goal, and limiting these funds would have damaging consequences. The amendment would preclude activities associated with hosting military-to-military contacts, both domestically and overseas. The activity extends official courtesies to guests of the United States and the Department of Defense and upholds the prestige and standing of the United States. The amendment would also harm the military services' ability to conduct community relations activities. The amendment hurts DoD's ability to represent itself to foreign nations and to the communities in which DoD activities are located. And it does so with very little payback. The bill before the House cuts over $15 billion on a bipartisan basis from the Defense Department budget on careful analysis of DoD programs. The approach in this bill yields both a higher payback and does not have the drawback of unintended consequences. Therefore, I urge rejection of the amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment. I rise in support of efforts to highlight the need for the Department of Defense to become audit ready. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Defense was instructed by Congress to provide taxpayers with audited financial statements for the first time in the 1990s. Now, 2011, more than 20 years later, and we're still talking about the same issue while our country faces a grave economic downturn. As a CPA, I understand the painfully difficult process that will go into auditing the largest enterprise on the face of the earth. But as General Petraeus told us last year, hard is not impossible. The American people made a very clear statement last November that they're ready for their government to get its fiscal house in order. The Department of Defense cannot continue to get a pass on this issue. We cannot allow the status quo practices to hinder our ability to provide for the finest military the world has ever known. This challenging goal will require buy-in from the top down, and it begins with the Office of the Secretary of Defense. We call on him for sound leadership to exercise fiscal responsibility. I will continue to press defense officials across the river to get their fiscal house in order. We must not be having this conversation 2 decades from now. Support this amendment, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleman's expired. Who seeks time? Does the gentleman from Washington seek? The gentleman from Virginia?
Mr. Chairman,
I yield back my time.
The gentleman from his time. The gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, my good friend mentioned that we need to put something in regulations or statutes to make the Department of Defense supply. We have done that. They have had it in statute. The law requires that they do it, and we've had it in there. They've just failed to do it 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, and they won't do it this year, and they admit that they're not a bit closer. The second thing is we mentioned unintended consequences. There are no unintended consequences with this amendment. We intend the consequences. You got to stop the partying until you do what the taxpayers are entitled to have required by the law, and that is just account for where the money's going. We can't determine how much we're going to spend on defense if we don't know where those dollars are going. I hope we will adopt this amendment, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment is offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendments.
I want a recorded vote on this one.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed.